Russia's blitz was supposed to flatten Ukraine fast, clearing the path for Putin and his Kremlin inner circle to intimidate a Europe they believed wasn't prepared. But that's not what happened. What was meant to be a lightning invasion has instead revealed Russia as one of the most ineffective modern militaries we've seen in the last 100 years. Putin's war effort is unraveling in real time, and we're watching what a full-scale military breakdown looks like as it happens. And the proof isn't coming from rumor or speculation. It's coming from a recent assessment by the Center for Strategic and International Studies, CSIS, which says Russia's progress in Ukraine is so underwhelming that the modern era hasn't seen anything comparable since World War I. In every major war since then, advances have generally moved faster than what Russia is managing in Ukraine today. Even in some of the most brutal World War I battles, troops still advanced at a quicker pace than Russia is achieving right now. As Putin's forces struggle through waves of drones, relentless artillery punishment, and a Ukrainian defense that keeps adapting to whatever Russia tries, one number jumps out above all others. Russia is advancing at roughly 15 to 70 meters per day, about 49.2 to 229.6 feet daily. That's the distance many people walk just to get from their front door to the sidewalk, which tells us something simple and devastating. Russia isn't steamrolling forward. It's crawling, and it isn't crawling toward victory either. If anything, it's crawling toward what looks increasingly like inevitable, crushing defeat. And the cost Russia is paying for these microscopic gains is enormous, something you'll see clearly if you stay with this video. But before we get to that price tag, we need to unpack what the CSIS report actually shows, what it means for Russia's pace of advance, and how much territory it's truly capturing. The last 2 years especially have been grim for Russia in terms of real forward movement. After Avdiivka fell in Donetsk Oblast in February 2024, Moscow believed it had seized the momentum and that Donetsk would now collapse under Russia's pressure. In their view, only one major obstacle remained: Pokrovsk, a city that had become Ukraine's critical logistics and transportation hub for Donetsk, and more broadly, much of the Eastern Front. Russia's plan sounded simple: grind it down, attrit the city until it folds, and from the moment Avdiivka fell, Pokrovsk came under heavy punishment. Glide bombs hit repeatedly, tearing apart buildings and wiping out what had once been a strong organized urban center. Russia pushed drones in, long-range platforms and FPV units, using them to pressure Ukrainian positions and push their forces closer to the city. And once Russian troops felt they were close enough to reach for Pokrovsk, the artillery escalated, paired with infantry attacks. It's the standard Russian playbook: drown the enemy in manpower and machinery until the defense collapses. Only this time, Russia hasn't gotten the win. CSIS notes that Russia has advanced just under 50 kilometers, about 31 miles, in the Pokrovsk direction from the fall of Avdiivka through January 2026. That works out to the glacial pace of roughly 70 meters per day we mentioned earlier. And it means Russia has spent nearly 2 years just to gain partial control around Pokrovsk. And we emphasize partial for a reason. Ukraine is still holding and defending the northern part of the city. So it could take weeks, or even months, before Pokrovsk breaks. And that's assuming it breaks at all. This failure to seize major cities and key settlements isn't only about Pokrovsk. Look at Chasiv Yar. It's smaller than Pokrovsk, but it's another crucial defensive node for Ukraine. Russia set its sights on Chasiv Yar in February 2024 after claiming Bakhmut the previous May, and Moscow has even announced more than once that it captured the settlement, including a claim as recently as July 2025. But that claim was made while Ukraine was still fighting there, and Ukraine is still fighting there today. In fact, Russia's pace in the Chasiv Yar direction is even slower than in Pokrovsk. In coverage referencing the CSIS analysis, United 24 Media reports that Russian forces have advanced around 10 kilometers, about 6.2 miles, over roughly 2 years of trying to take Chasiv Yar. And that translates to the low end of the headline figure we opened with, around 15 meters per day. Across nearly every active section of the front, where Russia is trying to push as hard as possible, you see the same pattern: failure measured in meters. In the Kupiansk sector in Kharkiv, Russia has moved forward only 9.5 kilometers, about 5.9 miles, since mid-November 2024. That equals an average daily advance of roughly 23 meters, just a little over 75 feet. And yes, Russia has claimed it captured Kupiansk as well. There's a reason for that claim, just like the claim about Chasiv Yar, and we'll get to it later in the video. The one area Russia can point to as a bright spot is its push toward Kupiansk and Zaporizhzhia Oblast. There, Russian forces have advanced 18.5 kilometers, about 11.5 miles, at a pace of around 297 meters per day, roughly 974 feet. But after seeing how Ukraine has shut down Russian advances in other sectors, the question becomes obvious. How long can Russia keep that tempo in Kupiansk before Ukraine builds the same kind of defense we're seeing elsewhere? Now we get to the most revealing comparison: how Russia's advance rate stacks up against other wars and major battles over the last century. Outside of Huliaipol, Russia's offensives are producing a pace of about 15 to 70 meters per day, depending on the sector. That is worse than the daily pace during the brutal grinding Battle of the Somme, where British and French forces still managed around 80 meters, about 262 feet per day. And remember what the Somme was: one of World War I's bloodiest nightmares. The UK alone suffered 57,000 casualties in a single day on July 1st, 1916. Russia hasn't reached that level of catastrophe in one day, but the fact remains, Russia's current pace is officially worse than a trench warfare battle where armies were slaughtered trying to cross no man's land. CSIS also points out that Russia advanced significantly faster after World War II's siege of Leningrad, reaching around 1 kilometer per day, about 0.62 miles, in that phase of fighting. During World War I's Battle of Galicia, Russia managed about 1.58 kilometers per day, just under a mile daily. Those were horrific battles with enormous casualties, and yet Russia today is moving far slower than the forces in those historical campaigns. But here's the part that's truly humiliating for Putin. Another fresh hit straight to the face. When Ukraine launched its counter-incursion into Russia's Kursk Oblast, Ukrainian forces advanced at roughly 1.25 kilometers per day, about 0.77 miles daily. That is faster than Russia has advanced on any major front inside Ukraine, except for the early days of the 2022 invasion, when Russia seized large areas in places like Kharkiv, Luhansk, and Donetsk, among other regions. Since then, the steamroller has become a crawl. A massive military turtle is about as useful as the turtle tanks Russia has rolled out. Tanks covered in improvised layered defenses in a desperate attempt to keep Ukrainian drones from destroying them. Those turtle tanks usually don't go far, and it looks like Russia's advancing forces aren't going far either. Zooming out, CSIS estimates that since the invasion began in February 2022, Russia has fully seized roughly 75,000 square kilometers, about 28,150 square miles, of Ukraine. If you count broader occupation and control, the number rises to roughly 120,000 square kilometers, a little over 46,300 square miles, around 20% of Ukraine. But that figure includes Crimea, which Russia seized in 2014, plus the smaller parts of the Donbass region Russia occupied during that earlier period. And what seems impressive at first becomes much less so when you look at what Russia has actually captured recently. In 2024, Russia occupied only 3,604 square kilometers, about 1,391 square miles. In 2025, the number rose to 4,831 square kilometers, about 1,865 square miles. But that was the result of a massive summer offensive that was supposed to deliver the finishing blow in a war that still shows no signs of ending. Earlier, we said you're watching what a military collapse looks like, and this is why. These pathetic gains, relative to the size, resources, and supposed power of Russia's military, show that Putin's forces cannot deliver meaningful progress. And even the progress they do make, as tiny as it is, comes at a price Russia cannot keep paying for much longer. That cost alone changes the entire equation for Putin. But before we go deeper into that, you're watching The Military Show, and this is the perfect moment to subscribe so you don't miss more breakdowns like this. Now, Russia's slow forward movement might be defensible if Putin were ordering his troops to wait, conserve manpower, and strike only when real opportunities appear. In that scenario, Russia would still be a turtle, but maybe it could claim the turtle's advantage from the fable: slow and steady wins. But you already know the reality. There is nothing slow and smart about Russia's strategy in Ukraine. There is no careful conservation. Russia has been losing soldiers at a rate almost nobody expected when the invasion began. CSIS estimates that Russia has lost about 1.2 million soldiers through death, injury, capture, or being listed as missing since February 2022. That estimate lines up closely with figures from Ukraine's Ministry of Finance, which places the number at roughly 1.236 million Russian troops, and 2025 was especially brutal for Russia. CSIS reports 415,000 Russian losses in that year alone, an average monthly casualty rate of about 35,000. The picture may be even darker than that, especially if you consider what Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky reported late in the year. Zelensky said Ukraine recorded 35,000 eliminations, not casualties, of Russian forces in December 2025. Add injuries and other losses on top of that, and you're looking at a monthly total far above the CSIS monthly estimate, at a pace that could push Russia past 500,000 casualties in 2026, assuming Ukraine sustains its defensive effectiveness. CSIS puts the broader context bluntly: No major power has suffered anywhere near these numbers of casualties or fatalities in any war since World War II, the report states, and CSIS adds a comparison. U.S. battlefield losses were dramatically lower: 54,187 battle deaths in Korea, 47,434 in Vietnam, 149 in the 1990-1991 Gulf War, 2,465 in Afghanistan during Operation Enduring Freedom and Operation Freedom Sentinel, and 4,432 in Iraq during Operation Iraqi Freedom. Whatever you think about those conflicts, Russia is approaching a point where it could lose in a single month the same number of soldiers the United States lost across the entire Korean War. And Putin's record looks even worse when measured against Russia's own post-World War II military history. CSIS estimates Russian battlefield fatalities between 275,000 and 325,000, numbers that are 11 times greater than fatalities across both Chechen wars in the 1990s and 2000s, and 17 times greater than the Soviet Union's fatalities in Afghanistan during the 1980s. It's almost as if Putin is actively trying to break records, and the prize for the slowest progress at the highest possible cost goes to Russia. What makes it worse is that Russia is not coming close to inflicting the kind of losses on Ukraine that Ukraine is inflicting on Russia. That might sound obvious. Slow advances usually mean limited ability to destroy the defender, but the ratios are still striking. CSIS estimates Ukraine has likely suffered between 500,000 and 600,000 casualties since February 2022, less than half of Russia's total. That yields a casualty ratio somewhere between 2-to-1 and 2.5-to-1, with Russian losses outweighing Ukrainian losses dramatically. We've hit you with a mountain of statistics so far. Now it's time to explain what it all means, especially for 2026 and where this war goes next. First, what you're seeing is Russia's attritional strategy playing out exactly as it was designed, only with results that are turning against Russia. Russia has historically relied on numerical advantage: bodies, shells, and sheer mass. Putin is essentially applying the old Soviet approach: throw enough manpower at the problem until the problem disappears. The soldiers, missiles, drones, artillery, glide bombs, tanks, everything are meant to grind Ukraine down over time. So yes, Russia was never going to advance rapidly every day. But what we should have seen was cycles. Russia gets stalled at strong fortifications, suffers delays, and then compensates with sudden, faster breakthroughs once defenses crack. That is not what happened. Instead, just as the Kyiv Post has noted, Ukraine's defense has remained strong enough that even the limited tactical adjustments Russia has made have not produced the breakthroughs Putin needs. Ukraine's front line is not collapsing. If anything, each wave of Russian assaults is destroying Russia's own front line from within. Every cycle of feeding troops and equipment into the grinder produces self-destruction, not victory. You can see that in Russia's equipment losses stacked on top of the bloodshed. Ukraine's Ministry of Finance says Russia has lost over 11,600 tanks, more than 23,950 armored vehicles, around 36,730 artillery units, well over 118,000 drones, and thousands more pieces of hardware. Basic logic says losses at that scale cannot continue indefinitely, especially if Russia still hopes for real breakthroughs. Assaults weaken as armor disappears and experienced soldiers die, replaced by new recruits who tend to die even faster, and those are not the only costs Russia is absorbing. But we'll come back to the second category of costs in a moment. First, let's return to what we flagged earlier: why Russia keeps claiming it has captured settlements where combat is still clearly ongoing. The answer is momentum, at least the illusion of it. Russia is trying to project the image that it holds the initiative, that it's winning, that city after city is falling, and the reason is simple. The side that appears to hold momentum often gets the stronger position at the negotiating table. Peace discussions have been ongoing for roughly a year, and Russia wants leverage. The New Voice of Ukraine addressed this in its reporting on Russia's false claim about Kupiansk. It referenced analysis from the Institute for the Study of War, ISW, which said the Kremlin is attempting to manufacture an alternative reality about the war to pressure the United States into favoring Russia during negotiations. It's basic leverage politics. If Russia can convince the right audiences that its forces are sweeping forward, it becomes easier to argue that Ukraine should surrender territory to end the war. But all the CSIS data we've covered destroys that smokescreen. And if you think that will stop the Kremlin from lying, you're kidding yourself. Putin has never allowed something as inconvenient as truth to block what he wants. Russia continues making claims it cannot support. On January 27th, Russia's chief of the general staff, Valery Gerasimov, claimed Russian forces captured Kupiansk, Vuzlovyi, and the Kharkiv region. They did not. According to the new Voice of Ukraine, Russian troops were still at least 10 kilometers, about 6.2 miles, away from that settlement. On that same day, Gerasimov also claimed Russia is advancing in virtually all directions. He said Russia seized 17 Ukrainian settlements in about 500 square kilometers, around 193 square miles, since January 1st. Again? No. ISW estimates Russia's real gains are barely half of that, around 265.45 square kilometers, just over 102 square miles for that period. It's lie after lie after lie, and the CSIS report has torn the entire narrative apart. But it's not hard to understand why the Kremlin pushes these stories, because beyond the price in blood and destroyed equipment, Russia is paying another crushing cost: money, plain brutal economics. Every day Russia makes near zero progress. It drains the country further. CSIS lays out the low points. In 2025, Russia's manufacturing sector endured 7 straight months of contraction. Production performed even worse. 10 months of contraction out of 12. Inflation in Russia was, and remains, high. That has contributed to declining consumer demand, which then feeds back into deeper manufacturing declines. And the economic growth Russia appeared to experience during the early war years has slowed to a near standstill. In 2025, Russia's real GDP growth was only 0.6%, down sharply from 4.3% the year before. And for 2026, the International Monetary Fund projects Russia will grow by 0.8%, a forecast revised downward from the IMF's earlier 1% estimate. Add to this the financial pressure caused by shrinking oil revenues, low foreign investment, minimal access to international borrowing, and Putin's short-sighted decision to dedicate roughly half of Russia's budget to the military, and you get an economic powder keg stacked on top of several others, all nearing detonation. So what does Russia have left? Nuclear weapons, and the appearance of a large military. That's about it, because money is shrinking, innovation is drying up, and the large military is increasingly hollowed out, depleted of experienced, skilled personnel, because those people are dead. Russia, in other words, is a declining power, and its tiny gains in Ukraine have revealed what Putin has tried to conceal for years. You can almost imagine the question hanging over the Kremlin. If Putin had never invaded Ukraine, could he still be pretending Russia is one of the strongest countries on earth? It's too late for that now. All that remains is a future of tiny, grinding gains and massive losses, exactly what we've been watching since 2024. Ukraine has flipped Russia's traditional method of war against it. The attrition fight is now tilting in Ukraine's favor. Putin's only real hope is political. Persuade Ukraine's Western backers to quit before Russia's military collapses completely. Putin is making his final move, and you can discover what that move is and why it won't work in our video. And if you liked this breakdown, make sure you subscribe to the Military Show for more coverage exposing the reality behind Russia's constant lies.